Hello, I'm EJ Hassenfratz from iDesign.com, and today I want to show you how you can quickly inject character into objects by animating them using objects called deformers. So you can see in this little animation, all these characters were animated by simply using deformers, no complex rigs whatsoever. So what I'm going to do is show you how you can animate this little mushroom character using a deformer to breathe more life and energy into this character's movement. All right, so here we are inside of the Cinema 4D interface, and you can see we have our mushroom character here in the Cinema 4D viewport. You can see all the objects that make up this little mushroom character here in our object manager that gives you a little overview of all the objects in your scene. In this panel, this is our material manager that holds all of the currently available materials we can apply to our character to give it a little bit more color. To apply materials inside of Cinema 4D, it's very easy. There's a few different ways you can do it. One is by simply clicking a material here in the material manager and just drag and dropping this and hovering this over different parts of our model here. You can see that it's highlighting different aspects, different pieces of my model. Now for this white texture, it's the eye texture. So what I want to do is just hover over the eye, and you'll see that it's now highlighted. And what I'm going to do is just release my mouse button, and it will then apply that eye material, that white material, to that object. And you can see in our object manager here, we have that white material tag now applied to this specific piece of geometry that makes up the eye. Now for this blue pupil material, I can apply this a different way by, instead of clicking and dragging this onto the actual object in the viewport, I can just directly apply this onto the pupil object in my object manager. So a couple different ways to apply materials. It's very, very easy. So let's just go ahead and quickly add this red mushroom material. I'm just going to drag and drop this into our viewport here and just apply it to the mushroom cap. And what you're going to see is that I have this cap object, and underneath it, I have this spots null. This is a null object that you can group different objects together with. And basically what I can do is, just like a folder structure, I can click this little box with the plus sign and unfold this group and see all the objects underneath it. You can see it's just a bunch of spheres, and these make up the mushroom spots. And basically what I want to do is drag and drop this spots texture and apply it to all these spots. Now instead of having to just drag and drop this onto individual spheres here, I can quickly just drag and drop this material onto the parent null object, and that will then apply that material to all of the child objects underneath, as long as they don't have a material applied to them already. So important things to know about the hierarchy and applying materials. But with the spot material applied to all of our mushroom spots, I can click this little box with the minus to collapse that null. And now I can click and drag and drop this little brownish tan material to the little cap part here. Let's drag and drop this mushroom material right on top of the mushroom face or head. And for the tongue, I want to get in a little bit more in our viewport so I can more easily apply this tongue material to the tongue. And what I'm going to do is utilize the navigation tools inside of Cinema 4D. You can see if you click and hold this button here, this is our pan tool. If I click and drag this up and down arrow, this is our zoom tool here. And this other rotational arrow is our rotation or orbit. Okay, so basically what I can do is use all of these three little icons here, just get in a little bit closer, get up close and personal with our mushroom, and just drag and drop this onto the tongue now that we can more clearly see it in our viewport. So let me just go ahead and zoom back out here and pan. Okay, so now we got our mushroom character. It has all of the materials applied to it, much more colorful. Now what I want to do is animate this character just hopping up in the air and landing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and make sure that I am at frame 3. That's where I want to start my animation. And this is my little scrubber playhead. And I can click and drag this to whatever frame I want. I can also just click directly on the frame number I want to actually move that playhead, but I want to be at frame 3. And what I want to do is keyframe this object going up in the Y direction. You can get a hint as to what directions you're seeing as far as the color-coded axis by this little gizmo in the lower left here. And basically we want to just move this character up in the Y axis, okay? So let's select this mushroom character null because this is the object we'll be keyframing, because this is going to control and move all of the objects underneath it, okay, that are children of that mushroom character null. So what I can do is click and drag in my scene. You can see that I'm moving all of those objects that make up my mushroom character. I'm going to Command or Control Z to undo that move. And to be able to access and add keyframes to the coordinates of this object, I'm going to go into my Attributes Manager that shows all of the attributes of whatever selected object I have in the Object Manager, and I'm going to go into the Coordinates tab. And this is going to reveal all of the position, scale, and rotation coordinates that we can then keyframe. Now, all of these coordinates have these little gray dots next to them, and if you hover over them, they'll be highlighted. Basically, this is where you can click to add a keyframe. So I want to move this up in the Y. So what I'm going to do is record this initial Y position that it's resting at right now. And let's go ahead and just go and scrub to about frame 18. So I'm just going to click on frame 18 and then just move this up. And what I'm going to do is make sure that when I grab and move my character, that I'm actually hovering and highlighting this Y axis so I can just constrain the movement of this character in the Y. If I didn't do that, it would be moving all over the place. So I'm going to Command Z or Control Z to undo that and just hover over the Y and highlight it and move it up, and we'll get constrained in that Y axis. And then once I have my character up high enough, I'll just record another keyframe at frame 18. Now what I want to do is have him land at frame 32. So I'm just going to click at frame 32. And I know it's going to be the same Y position as that initial keyframe that we set. So all I need to do is duplicate this first keyframe. I'm just going to click on this keyframe and hold Command or Control key down, click and drag, and what that'll do is duplicate that keyframe, and I'll just drag this all the way over to frame 32. And if I scrub with this little purple rectangle, you can see that I'm using my scrub playhead to just scrub through my animation. And if I want to actually see this play at real time, I can just click this little play button, and there's our happy little hopping mushroom right there. And I'm just going to go ahead and use these little widgets in the top corner to just reframe my animation here in the viewport. So I'm going to click the pause button, and what I'm going to do is I want to add more character, inject more energy and interest into my animation using what's called a deformer. Now, a deformer is something that deforms geometry. It's very aptly named. And one of the animation principles that I absolutely love and love applying to my objects is squash and stretch. And there just so happens to be a squash and stretch deformer. Now, to access all of your deformers, you're going to go and navigate to this little menu here with this little bend cube, and you're going to click and hold, and you're going to reveal all of the deformers that are available to you in Cinema 4D, and navigate to the squash and stretch. And what we're going to do is just select that. And basically what I want to do now is make sure we're at the start of our animation. So I can either click and drag my playhead to frame 0, or I can just click this leftmost button here to go to the start of my animation, okay? And what I need to do is build a relationship between the deformer and the objects that I want to deform. Right now, there's no relationship because we need to drag and drop, click and drag and drop this squash and stretch deformer and make it a child of this mushroom character null. Now you'll notice when you drag, you'll get all these different types of icons that pop up. One has an arrow pointing to the left, and one has an arrow pointing down, and there's a little box underneath it. And basically, to make an object a child of another object, you're going to hover over until you see that downward arrow. And when I release my mouse button, you'll see that I just made my squash and stretch deformer a child of my null. Now, since this is in the same level of hierarchy as all my other objects, I can use the squash and stretch to deform all of these objects. Now, to reveal the attributes that I can keyframe to add that squash and stretch to all of those objects, I'm going to navigate to the Object tab with my squash and stretch deformer selected. And the only thing we really need to worry about here is this factor. Okay, so I can adjust this factor percentage one of two ways. I can either click and drag in this little slider, or I can click and drag these little arrows, and you can see our squash and stretch that way. So I know that the initial factor started at 100, so that's where I'm going to begin to keyframe from. So let's go ahead and at frame 0, I'm going to go ahead and record that factor of 100%. So at 100%, there's no squash and stretch deformation happening at all. And then what I'm going to do is let's go to frame 2 and keyframe this so he is squashing. Okay, so he's getting ready, he's building up energy to be able to hop. And I'm just going to go ahead and set a new keyframe. Okay, so we recorded a new keyframe at frame 2. And then what I'm going to do is just scrub ahead with my playhead and wait until this character is about in midair and change the squash to a stretch. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this factor value beyond 100%. So he's stretching, so maybe about 118, and record a keyframe at frame 8. And then what's going to happen is right about frame 18, that's where our character reaches the pinnacle of this jump, okay? And what we're going to do is we're actually going to keyframe this factor back down to 100%. So I can click and drag to highlight that number and just enter in 100% and hit enter and then set a keyframe. Okay, so right now if I scrub through, we have the squash, got that energy built up, then we got the stretch as he's going upwards, and then it goes back to its original form as it's kind of hanging in the air there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go ahead to frame 24 and let's add back in some of that stretch as the mushroom character begins to fall. Okay, so about 124, all right? And then what's gonna happen is it's gonna stretch all the way to right about here, and I'm gonna set another keyframe. And right at frame 33, I'm gonna squash, because this is after the character landed, and set another keyframe. And at the very end, let's bring this back to 100% and set a keyframe. So now if I hit play, we got the jump up and down, and we got this really cool squash and stretch happening, which is really, really cool. Now, it's still missing something. We have the default ease in and ease out keyframes on that Y position. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna stop this playback, and I'm gonna go into my timeline so I can adjust my speed of my animation using animation curves. So what I'm gonna do is go to Window, Timeline, F Curve, and what you should see is a few animation tracks here, or a few objects in here. If you don't see anything in here, just drag and drop the mushroom character in here, and you'll see that now you see the mushroom character, and if you click on the mushroom character, you'll see that Y position animation track. And just like we have the gizmos to navigate in our viewport, we have the same kind of navigation tools in our timeline to be able to pan or zoom in to our animation track, okay? So what I'm going to do is remove the ease in and ease out curves here. And to do that, I'm just going to click and drag to get a rectangular selection to select that first keyframe, and click this Bezier handle and hold, and just move this on up. So it's going to be a very fast trajectory upwards. And then what I'm going to do is click and drag to get a rectangular selection and let go to select this last keyframe. Grab this last Bezier handle by clicking on it and just dragging this up here as well. So we got a really nice arc, okay? It's just a really nice rounded arc. And then I can just close out of my timeline. And let's see what our animation looks like now without that ease in and ease out. So you really get the sense of weight and fun with both adjusting our Y position animation track and adding in that squash and stretch deformer. Now check out if I turn off the squash and stretch deformer by clicking on this little green checkbox to deactivate it. And you're going to see how much more bland this animation looks. So just by adding in the animation principle of squash and stretch, we injected so much more energy and weight and fun into our character animation. So what we can now do is go ahead, and I'm just going to hit pause here. Now what I want to do is copy and paste this character into my main scene. So what I'm going to do is make sure I select the mushroom character null, hit Command or Control C, and then go to my other project by going to Window and choosing the other project, and then just hit Command or Control V to paste my mushroom character into this new scene. And we have all of these really nice lights and environment in here, and let's just see what this looks like in the environment. So you can see by simply animating deformers like the squash and stretch deformer, you can see how you can easily inject more energy and character and more life into your objects inside of Cinema 4D. And I highly encourage you to hop on to Cineversity.com and check out my detailed series on how to make this complete scene with all of these characters. And I'll show you how to animate all of these with just using deformers inside of Cinema 4D.